Great song. Hi, everyone. Excellent conference, brilliant speakers, and so in that vein, I'm very excited and somewhat daunted to be up here speaking to you today. I'm going to talk about, or show you really in the next 20 minutes, why I think that the real opportunity with AI is not the capabilities we see in front of us right now. The real opportunity comes from the pace at which emerging capabilities are maturing and coming at us. In other words, while we are very excited about Gen AI and inspired by the capabilities, the wave that is coming towards us next is incredible. You saw some of it earlier on in Sam's presentation, and I'm going to bring that to life here. Hi everyone, I'm Pugh. I'm Global Head of Data and AI at Endava. Endava is a 13,000 people, 20-year-old company. We started in the payments industry, so 73% of all card transactions in Europe run on kit that we've built, so you interact with us every single day. And what we basically do is we look at technology and we actually try and connect that to drive real valuable business outcomes. That's basically what we do. So my job is brilliant because what I get to do, even though I'm kind of from a pharmaceutical background, got 25 years in pharma, I get to go and work with leading banks and insurers, and I get to go work with retailers, I work with automotive companies, and then I work pretty much every day with OpenAI as a company and talk to people there and so on. And I get to bring all that knowledge and learning back to healthcare and pharma and help our customers drive outcomes for patients, which is a brilliant role. I love the role. And I'm going to try and talk today from that perspective of looking over the fence, looking what other industries are doing, and talking about how we can bring it to life, and how it can really help us achieve our goals. So if we killed omnichannel yesterday, I think I could kind of perhaps make this statement quite, are we kind of coming to the end of the Gen AI hype cycle? Why am I saying this? Well, in a lot of industries that I work in, a lot of industries I touch, particularly the early adopters of generative AI, they're starting to see some challenges, right? I think that there was this real sense of being seen to be doing Gen AI. Go and do Gen AI. How many Gen AI projects have we got, right? So there was a real rush to invest, a real rush to get going with these things. And inevitably, you get to the point where a lot of the projects fail, right? They don't quite return on investment. And I'm just starting to see in some industries a bit of fatigue around talking about Gen AI and chatbots and so on. So let's start off today by talking a bit about why some of these Gen AI projects seem to have failed. And for me, there's basically three reasons. The first reason, Marco said, one of the cardinal sins of AI is hallucinations, right? We know that the very design of the capabilities in this means that things can go wrong. We can make mistakes, right? Now, humans make mistakes all the time, but we sort of have mechanisms in place to deal with those mistakes. And so we've seen lots of examples where people have built proof of concepts, done a lot of work, and got to a point where they go, I've built this wonderful Gen AI system, and it can create personalized emails by the thousands, and only 1 in 100 are likely to give out false information. And people go, what does that mean? That's just not viable, right? That's not possible. And so I think people have really struggled with how we deal with hallucinations and what it means. And therefore, a lot of the proof of concepts we've seen have got to a point where they go, well, that's just not accurate enough. The second thing which is interesting is also the speed at which technology changes. I was at a conference in London earlier this year when a very famous financial company stood up on stage and said, we have invested $1 million, and we've been working on a Gen AI project now for 6 months. And I quote, he said, what we've produced is brilliant and useless. I thought, a great statement. So people were like, excuse me, what do you mean? What he basically said was, look, in 6 months, we've created something that is breathtaking. It's really inspiring. It's very exciting. But actually, in the 6 months we took to do this, the entire technology just completely moved on. So by the time we finished this thing, it was essentially defunct, right? So the fast-paced environment doesn't really help. And the last thing is a lot of the use cases we see, a lot of the classic Gen AI use cases, they're sort of 1 step removed or 2 steps removed from the actual value drivers that we care about, right? They are maybe a chatbot or a knowledge system, and they kind of solve problems that are like around the things that we care about, but not actually the things that we care about. So we're starting to see people who are, struggling with Gen AI and maybe kind of starting to look at what's next. Okay, quick show of hands. Who was in the room earlier for Sam's brilliant talk on Agentic AI? It was great, wasn't it? I reached out to Sam when I saw him on the agenda and I said, can you just tell me what you're talking about? And he was very gracious. He came back and told me. So I ditched like half my slides, which was brilliant. So now I haven't got to talk too much about agentic. I will in a second. But I can talk a bit more about the so what, right? The actual use cases this thing could support. So very quickly, if you weren't in Sam's talk earlier, what is Agentic AI? Well, it builds on 3 innovations in the generative AI space. Number 1, we probably know about. Agents, these things that we interact with, so a ChatGPT agent, let's say, these things can now have roles, objectives, aspirations, bias, constraints, knowledge. Okay? You can now create an agent that's an expert in oncology, or an expert on compliance in Australia, or you can create these very opinionated, very knowledge-based agents. And there are lots and lots of ways of creating these things. You can create one in literally 10 minutes these days, right? If you look on ChatGPT Enterprise and create a GBT, if you go to the Salesforce stand, they'll show you Agentforce, which is a way of creating these agents very, very quickly, right? The next thing is, agents can use tools. So I think we heard this earlier as well. So what that means is, instead of just giving me content back, return to me some text, the agents can now operate tooling on your behalf, whether that's a CRM system or an ERP system, or maybe some coding tools or some office tools or the web or email. So you can now say to an agent, can you go and do a bunch of things for me and then come back, right? So, and this is exciting. And there's a whole industry right now growing up where you can hire, is the word they use, AI employees, right? There are companies like Artisan and Decagon and loads of companies like that where you basically go and hire an AI employee who sits in your organization. You chat to them via Slack or Teams or whatever it is, and it's just like they're sat somewhere in the organization, right? And they have a particular role, particular purpose. Very, very exciting. And the last thing is, and again, Sam mentioned this earlier, you can also, if you can create, agents with roles, and they can use tools, where the fun really begins is when you create teams of these things that can collaborate together in order to actually accomplish complex tasks. And that's really the potential of this agentic thing, which is sometimes called multi-agent models or agentive and so on, but the word agent tends to be a part of this all the time. So what I thought I would do is borrow from a different industry and show you this in action. I will show you literally a production example of this that is saving a company millions of dollars all the time right now. Now, this is actually from a different industry. I promise you I'll show you a different industry. This is from insurance. And it's a simple renewal workflow, very simple renewal workflow. So we have, and by the way, this is actually using a platform that we call Morpheus, which we use as a kind of accelerator with customers, right? Okay, so if we can press play for a second, and I'm going to ask you to pause in a second, and I'll explain to you what's going on. In particular, I'm going to explain why you're seeing a very ugly demo. Hang on a second. Okay, if we can pause there, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen here, why is it an ugly demo? Because what you're seeing is 2 things. I think you're seeing, we believe, the first ever globally production use case of agentic. So this is very early, this use case, right? But the second thing is you're seeing the under-the-hood version. You're not seeing the nice, pretty front end. You're seeing actually what's going on. If you're in Sam's presentation earlier, you're seeing literally the conversation between those brains, right? Between the agents. So that's what you're seeing. On the screen, what we have is 2 agents. The one on the left is called Colette, the one on the right is Henry. It's customary to give these things human names, right? And what you can see, probably the most important text, is probably the smallest text. Colette is an underwriter, so in the same way you could create a GPT today, we've taught Colette what it means to be an underwriter, and Henry is an administrative person, basically, right? And this entire use case is all about a renewal workflow, and it's very, very simple. So we get an email from our client, hey client, hey team, please find attached a renewal document. This is the document here. My client is called Andrew Salons Inc. That's all we know right now, right? Well, that's important in a second. The current insurer is called Travelers, if you've heard of that insurer. It's one of the competitors of who we worked for. And this is literally, can we match this quote? Can you beat this quote for me? And if we press play, please, what we're going to see now over the next 1 minute and about 10 seconds is you literally see 2 agents acting autonomously but having a conversation about what to do and how to solve this. So what you can see first is Henry goes to the CRM system to find out that Andrew Salons Inc. is a chain of hair salons. Then goes externally to look at all different sources and find that actually this business has a great reputation. Hands the information to Colette, our underwriter. Now she's got all this information, Colette can actually start her analysis. So it's a set of hair salons, so slips, trips, and falls, repetitive strain injury. And if we can pause just there, if we may. This is the most interesting moment in this entire workflow. So our customer has a product that has an ESG element, like a sustainability pricing element. This is the point where Colette has realized, I'll use the word realized, that she has no information on the ESG credentials of this business. So she goes to Henry and says, can you find some for me? So Henry is now tasked with going to find ESG information, but we don't have any data on that. So let's see what Henry does if we can press play again. So Henry realizes that he's got no internal information on this company, on ESG, so literally finds a company report, strips the PDF, and summarizes the document on the fly, and hands that information back to Colette. Colette can then finish her analysis, so she carries on with her analysis, she completes her analysis and said, well, let's create a quote, right? Let's create a quote for this. There's the quote, and the last thing she's going to do, and if we can pause just there, is create an email. This is the end of the process. So it's about 1 minute and 10 seconds what you saw. And what you saw is two agents collaborating, and the output looks like this. Hi guys, further to my email, we're able to match the quote for the renewal document of this cost based on the analysis we did. Oh, by the way, given that you mentioned that Travelers is the competitor, these are the reasons to moving for us, Slug. Well, we offer unlimited endorsements. Did you know that Travelers charge for this? And that email goes back to a human who then reviews it and then sends it out. So that's, maybe you've seen some of this demo before, something like this, but that is two agents completely acting autonomously, no human involvement right now, who are actually collaborating to fulfill that task. And we've got solutions that use 2 agents, 5 agents, 6 agents, and it's kind of, the secret sauce is really in getting them to actually work together. Okay, so if I move on. So we've spent about 14, 16 months working on Agentic AI. We've probably delivered about 20, 25 projects across different industries. And what I wanted to do quickly is talk to you about what we've learned. Like, what's this stuff good for? So it's good for demos, right? Although pretty ought to be nice. But it's, what is this stuff really useful for? And basically what we've worked out is there's 3 main use cases, right? The first one is automation. That thing you saw there was like automation, but with intuition. Right? It's like you're not teaching agents, hey, there's 12 steps in this process, off you go. You're teaching the agent, what we're trying to achieve is X, these are your boundaries, and then you're saying, go, carry on. As long as you're actually meeting the objectives, using the tools that you've got at your disposal, we're kind of happy, right? So that orchestration part is incredible. There's been papers recently where they've been saying that actually customer workflows, we can probably take up about 80% of the work in those areas, for example, right? The second thing that I'll talk about a lot is reflection, which I'll talk about it more, so I'll ignore it for now. The last one is interesting. We had this lovely image earlier in Sam's presentation of all these brains sat around with different roles, and they were all discussing something, right? We found that a really interesting use case in that area. What we've worked out is if you actually create agents who have different viewpoints, and then put them in conflict with each other and give them a decision to make, they will all air their different viewpoints and come to a consensus about what decision to make. Now, we all know the best way to make decisions is get all the right perspectives in the room, right? We want to look at this from all sorts of different viewpoints. That's how you actually really deliver great results. You can now do that at scale with agents, which is really, really exciting. But I'm going to talk about this middle one, because it's really exciting, it's very mature. This is probably the simplest possible agentic pattern, and it's something called reflection. So reflection is a really, really simple concept, right? All it basically does is instead of having one agent, you have 2. So let me give you an example to start with. It's an example from a session that was just now, a couple of sessions ago, we talked about how do you generate content that might be relevant to a particular location, let's say, like Australia or Brazil and so on, right? What you might do right now is you might sit in front of like ChatGPT or whatever you use, right? And you might say, generate me a concept or some content that will resonate with this audience. And it comes back. And it might be perfect, right? It might be really not very good at all. Most likely it's good-ish, like it's okay, but I wouldn't do it like that. So what do? You actually review the content and you go, Try that again, but this time, try and think about this or fix this. So you're providing feedback to the agent, okay? This reflection pattern, all it's doing is replacing you with a different agent in that loop. So you basically have one agent whose responsibility is to create something, do something, create content, create an email, create code, and then you have a separate reviewer, and basically their job is to make sure the thing that comes out is actually appropriate and correct. And so what you then have is a back and forth conversation between these two agents until they go, you know what, I think that's really good, and then it comes to you. Okay? That's the reflection loop. It's really, really simple, but very, very powerful that we found. And we have found use cases for this across so many areas. It's crazy. Okay? And I'm going to bring some of those to life now. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 use cases in the life sciences area, but I'll also stray into a couple of use cases in other areas as well. On the left-hand side, this is a really cool one. If anyone's worked in the kind of clinical area around like CDISC standards and analyzing data off the back of clinical trials, you know it's expensive, right? And it's slow. In particular, there are moments where in order to reduce risk of error, you literally have 2 programmers who will sit in 2 different rooms and double code things in the clinical workflow. Very complex. They've got to have read the CDISC specifications, this 4,000-page long, incredibly exciting document about data standards, right? They've got to adhere to that, and so on. What we've worked out working with one of the biggest pharma companies in the world right now is that actually we can use that reflection pattern in order to fully automate the creation of that code in a way that is obviously a lot faster, but more accurate than a human. Okay? Now, the secret in this area is not we fully automate software development. That's kind of impossible right now. But the actual standards and the framework and the way in which that problem is really bounded allows you to write code that is compliant. And that one use case is going to save this company $20 million a year, and it's going to take us about 3 months to do it. So that's kind of where we are, right? That's where it took us 3 months. We've got 8 studies that we're trialing on from January, but that's one. And that's an example where accuracy is everything in that area, and that's why I like that example. The other example, I'm actually started with a project in an airline. Earlier on this year, January, February time, we were working with this airline, and we'd worked with them before. And what they were trying to do was they basically wanted to say, you know, when customers reach out to us, particularly in times of disruption, we want to be able to actually have a kind of empathetic, personalized interaction with these customers. But the problem is we can't scale that big, right? Particularly through social channels, so X, WhatsApp, and so on. So the first goal was actually building a chatbot, right? So it was basically we're going to build a chatbot so that when anyone actually spoke to this airline via these channels, we'd actually go back and say, really sorry about what's happened to you. Hey, you know, I get it. I get you frustrated. Let me help you, right? That was the idea, right? But the challenge in the early days was things like, I want you to make the customer happy. So the chatbot would go, yeah. Hey, customer, we're just going to give you free flights for the next year. As many flights as you want. It was like, whoa, hang on a second. So you have to constrain these things, right? You have to make sure the language is right and it conforms. The difference between sorry and apologize is really important, right? And the customer kept saying to us, the last thing I want to do is to see a screenshotted message on the front of the Daily Mail. If you're in the UK, you know what that means, right? So we ended up using a reflection pattern. So instead of actually generating one message for, you know, we basically had something generating the message and then things checking it for bias, for tone of voice, for accuracy, and so on. So actually had that back and forth, and that's how we got good messages. We're now just starting to do that with a pharmaceutical company. So we've actually got a pharma company that we're working with. We're working with a marketing team, and the idea is how do I create personalized messages at scale, but within those bounds of having the reflection loop, so I know I'm not going to say something that isn't accurate. I'm going to do things that will resonate with the right market, that understand the compliance in a particular market, and so on. And that's a really exciting project. A couple of other projects that we've got on the go right now. One of the early projects we did in banking was in sort of corporate actions, corporate affairs, compliance. And basically it's a series of like checks and balances, basically, right? It's like someone wrote an email, right? Is that email the right thing to have written? Can I check it? Is that department happy with that email? Is this happy? You know, So all of a sudden, you kind of have all these checks and balances that need to happen. What we found out, of course, later on is that's a perfect kind of segue into like MLR, right? So we've actually got a project right now that's starting to use this agentic pattern in order to fully automate a lot of the MLR processes, and in particular, the kind of checks and balances and those kind of like different opinions and how they compete together and come to some consensus, with the ability to put your hand up at some point and go, excuse me, human, we don't know what to do in this situation, right? So that's an exciting one. We've got some projects in pharmacovigilance and some in code deployment. So we're working with a big healthcare company. The challenge they've got is the cost of deploying their healthcare software solution into some markets just makes it untenable for that market, essentially, right? So we've actually worked out we can use some of these agentic patterns to reduce the cost of kind of configuration code creation in order to actually make it viable in the markets they want to go to. One last example that I think is a good one that came up actually since I wrote these slides. I was working with a retailer, and they said the problem that we've got is scale. We've got 1 employee for 800 customers. Just the scale is just completely out of whack. How do you do things at scale and be personal? And basically, we got to a point where the customer said, hang on a second, I could just create 800 agents in my business, one that represents every customer, right? And they could understand the customer and have much better interactions and look after them on a more one-to-one basis. I was like, yep, you could absolutely do that. And then the customer went, so this is not me, the customer then went, and if we do that, we've basically got an entire digital twin of my business. I've got 800 customers I could test out products with, or have a marketplace that they can look at and go, oh, my customer would really like this thing, and actually nuance it into customer. So I think there's all sorts of opportunities in this space. So what do we do about it, right? Apart from kind of looking at this and being very excited, what can we do? Basically, I think there's 3 things. Lance yesterday said, great quote, I love the quote, the problem with AI is there's too much AI, right? Customer said this to me recently, which use case do you choose when the use case is everything, right? I mean, what do you do, right? Where do you start? And I think choosing the right use case, understanding what's possible, understanding what's viable, right? And then actually kind of drilling into those things helps you to get to a point where you're not, and this is one of the biggest pitfalls in AI, right? You're not brilliantly solving the wrong problem on your expense, right? The second thing that Sam again talked about, people have as well, is getting your house in order, building the foundations to be ready to be able to accept these capabilities and leverage them against the use cases we're talking about. And the last one, of course, is actually delivering the value to the use cases you can identify. So I hope that kind of makes sense in terms of where Agentic is and why I'm so excited about the next wave, and why I think that in terms of impact, it's going to be so much bigger than the Gen AI world that we're working in right now. I think the learnings that we have from the last sort of 12, 14, 18 months are, number one, the pace of maturity of the capabilities is staggering. Like every week we're seeing articles where it's like, wow, that's now a thing, right? That's now doable. Some of these things that I'm talking about right now, by the time you get to Dubrovnik, are going to be like old hat, right? I mean, this is incredibly fast and incredibly potent. The second thing is that just that simple reflection pattern, having 2 agents in conflict work together for things like checking content before it goes out the door, has an incredible boost in terms of the ability to generate content or output that is accurate and appropriate to an audience. Okay. I think the other thing as well is that, it's really important right now to be thinking about what's coming at us, and therefore being able to get our house in order, to get the basics right so we can really leverage these things as they're coming at us. So I'm pretty much out of time, probably got maybe time for one quick question, but please do get in touch with me. There's my contact details there, or find me over lunch. I'd be more than happy to share more of what we've learned in this space. It's incredibly exciting. I've also got a webinar that I'm doing on this subject soon as well with Fierce. But yeah, we might have just time for one quick question. There's one here.
Hi. How different are the results for employing 2 agents for the reflection pattern versus employing a single agent with a large context window?
Brilliant question. So I'm a biostatistician by training, right? So if you come to me and say, I've got the best model in the world, it's really complicated, I go, really? If you say to me, I've got a good model, but then I've got this entire framework that allows it to learn and test and so on, then I get what we're doing. And I think that's the difference here, right? So I think what we're actually seeing is the real accuracy comes from what's known as within agent and between agent reflection, basically. Within agent is what the latest models from OpenAI are doing, for example. But when you actually put two models in conflict with different intentions and actually get them to critique each other's work, that's where you get the accuracy. And more importantly, not just the accuracy, but you achieve something that is really important in this world, which is you get an agent that knows when to raise its hand and goes, I just don't know, which really is what we need to happen. Right? Otherwise, it might. If you're trying to build a solution, it's trying to read an address from a document, right? And there's actually two addresses in the document. You don't want that agent to just pick one, right? You want the agent to go, whoa, there's something happening here. There's two addresses. What do you want me to do, right? And so that's kind of where I think that you get, having those two agents in conflict. That's where you really get that kind of potential, right?
Thank you.
Wonderful. Have a wonderful lunch. Thank you very much. Come and catch me if you want to chat more.